r/entitled parent stepdad mocked my cooking until I won Iron Chef. The smell of caramelized onions and fresh thyme filled the kitchen as I carefully plated my beef Wellington, hands trembling slightly as I arranged the microgreens. This was it, the dish that could change everything. I'd been perfecting this recipe for months, sneaking practice sessions when Rick was at work and Mom was running errands. What the hell is that mess supposed to be? I froze, my heart sinking as Rick's voice cut through my concentration. Of course he'd come home early today of all days. I turned to see my stepdad standing in the doorway, his face twisted in that familiar expression of disgust he reserved specifically for anything I touched in his kitchen. "It's beef Wellington," I said quietly, trying to keep the pride out of my voice. "I've been working on wasting my expensive ingredients, more like." Rick strode over and poked at the golden pastry with his finger, leaving an ugly dent. "Look at this amateur garbage. The pastry's too thick, the presentation looks like something a 5-year-old would make, and I can smell the burnt edges from here." My chest tightened. There were no burnt edges. I checked 3 times. The pastry was perfectly golden, the internal temperature exactly 125 degrees, and I'd measured every component down to the gram. This was some of my best work. "The recipe calls for..." "I don't want to hear about your little recipe cards from the internet," Rick interrupted, his voice getting louder. "Real cooking isn't something you learn from YouTube videos in your bedroom. It takes actual skill, actual training. Something you'll never have." I bit my tongue, watching as he deliberately knocked over my small bowl of finishing sauce. The rich wine reduction I'd spent an hour perfecting spread across the granite countertop like spilled blood. "And clean up this disaster before your mother gets home. I don't want her seeing what you've done to my kitchen." He grabbed a beer from the fridge and started to leave, then turned back. "Oh, and Emma. Stay away from my Le Creuset pans. Those cost more than your college fund, which isn't saying much." The kitchen fell silent except for the quiet hiss of the sauce dripping onto the floor. I stared at my Wellington, still beautiful despite Rick's fingerprint marring the crust. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. This had been going on for 3 years, ever since Mom married him. At first, I tried to impress him, thinking maybe we could bond over food. Rick claimed to be some kind of culinary expert because he'd taken a few weekend cooking classes and owned expensive equipment. But every attempt I made was met with criticism, mockery, and increasingly creative ways to tear down my confidence. Last month at my cousin's birthday party, he'd loudly announced to the entire family that my little cooking hobby was just a phase, that I had no real talent and should focus on more realistic career goals. The humiliation had burned worse than any grease splatter. But as I looked at my Wellington, truly looked at it, something shifted inside me. The pastry was flawless. The smell was incredible. The technique was spot on. I wasn't deluding myself about my abilities. I was good at this. Really good. Rick could mock me all he wanted, but he couldn't change the truth. I had talent, I had passion, and I had been getting better every single day despite his attempts to crush my dreams. It was time to prove it. The next morning, I discovered Rick had thrown my Wellington in the garbage, plate and all. I found it while taking out the trash, my ceramic plate buried under coffee grounds and banana peels. The sight hit me like a physical blow. Not just the waste of food, but the deliberate cruelty of destroying something I'd poured hours into creating. Looking for something? Rick appeared behind me, coffee mug in hand, smirking. "You threw away my dish." "I threw away the mess you left in my kitchen." "There's a difference." He took a slow sip of his coffee, eyes never leaving my face. "Maybe next time you'll listen when I tell you to clean up." I'd spent 20 minutes cleaning that kitchen until it sparkled. We both knew it. That was a perfectly good meal. That was amateur garbage taking up space in my refrigerator. Rick stepped closer, his voice dropping to that particular tone he used when Mom wasn't around. "Let me make something clear, Emma. This house, this kitchen, those ingredients, they're mine. Paid for by my job, my money, my hard work. You're a guest here, and guests don't get to play chef with my property." The words stung because I knew Mom would never hear them. Around her, Rick played the role of supportive stepfather perfectly. He'd even bought me a cookbook for Christmas, though he'd made sure to mention loudly how he'd found it in the bargain bin. "I paid for those ingredients myself," I said quietly. "With what money?" "Your allowance." Rick laughed. "Sweetheart, you're 17. You don't have real money. Everything you think you own actually belongs to your mother and me. Including whatever delusions you have about being a chef." Heat rose in my cheeks, but I forced myself to stay calm. Getting emotional would only give him more ammunition. "I'm going to prove you wrong." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Rick's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Oh really? And how exactly are you planning to do that? Enter a bake-off at the county fair?" His laughter was sharp and ugly. "Face reality, kid. Cooking isn't just about following directions. It's about palate, creativity, instinct, things you either have or you don't. And you don't. You don't know what I'm capable of." "I know exactly what you're capable of." Rick's expression hardened. "Wasting food, making messes, and living in a fantasy world where you matter. Here's some free advice, find a more realistic dream. Maybe something in retail. You're certainly good at disappointment, might as well get paid for it." He walked away, leaving me standing by the garbage can with my destroyed Wellington. But his words had sparked something dangerous in my chest. Not just anger, determination. That afternoon, while Rick was at his office and Mom was at her book club, I opened my laptop and started researching. Local culinary competitions. Amateur chef contests. Anything where I could prove my skills against real judges who didn't know Rick, didn't care about his opinions, and would evaluate my food based purely on merit. Most competitions required participants to be 18 or have parental consent. My birthday wasn't until December, still 4 months away. Mom might sign for me, but she'd inevitably mention it to Rick, and he'd find a way to sabotage it. Then I found it, the Metro Area Iron Chef Challenge. Open to amateur cooks of all ages. No parental consent required for minors who could prove culinary competency through a portfolio submission. Winner receives $2,000, a feature in local foodie magazine, and a scholarship consideration to the Culinary Institute. The application deadline was in 2 weeks. My hands were shaking as I started typing my entry essay, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from excitement. The portfolio submission was harder than I'd expected. The Iron Chef Challenge required 3 photos of original dishes, detailed recipes with technique explanations, and a video demonstration of knife skills. Easy enough, except I had to do everything in complete secrecy. I started small, using my phone to record practice sessions in my bedroom with a cheap knife set I bought with babysitting money. But I quickly realized how ridiculous it looked, trying to demonstrate proper julienne technique on a tiny cutting board balanced on my desk while whispering to avoid detection. I needed real kitchen access, and that meant getting creative with Rick's schedule. The first opportunity came on a Tuesday when Rick had a dentist appointment and Mom was covering an extra shift at the clinic. I had exactly 2 hours to photograph my signature dishes and film the knife skills video. Everything went wrong immediately. The lighting in the kitchen was terrible for photography, too many shadows, harsh reflections off the stainless steel appliances. My first attempt at plating my pan-seared duck breast looked muddy and unappetizing through the phone camera. I was already 20 minutes in and had nothing usable. Then I accidentally grabbed Rick's premium truffle oil instead of regular olive oil for the risotto. The bottle was nearly full when I started. By the time I realized my mistake, I'd used almost a quarter of it. My heart hammered as I stared at the expensive bottle, knowing Rick monitored his ingredients like a hawk. I ran to 3 different grocery stores before finding the same brand, using almost all of my saved babysitting money to replace it. When I finally got home, I had 45 minutes left and still needed to cook, plate, and photograph 3 complete dishes. The second dish, my beef Wellington, came together perfectly, but as I was arranging the final garnish, I heard Rick's car in the driveway. Panic set in. He wasn't supposed to be home for 20 minutes. I grabbed my phone, snapped 3 quick photos of the Wellington without proper styling, and shoved everything into the oven to hide it. The kitchen still smelled like truffle oil and fresh herbs when Rick walked in. "Smells fancy in here," he said, eyeing me suspiciously. "What have you been up to?" "Just making lunch." I gestured to the peanut butter sandwich I'd hastily slapped together as cover. Rick opened the oven and found my Wellington inside. His face darkened immediately. "I told you to stay away from my ingredients. I used my own." "Bullshit." He pulled out the dish and examined it. "This is my beef. My puff pastry. My mushrooms." His voice was getting louder with each word. "How stupid do you think I am, Emma?" I wanted to explain about replacing everything, about the receipts in my backpack, but the words stuck in my throat. He'd never believe me anyway. Rick picked up my carefully crafted Wellington and walked straight to the garbage disposal. "No." I lurched forward, but he'd already turned it on. The sound of my work being destroyed was horrible, wet grinding that seemed to go on forever. "Next time you steal from me, the consequences will be worse than wasted food," Rick said over the noise. "Are we clear?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Inside, something was breaking, but it wasn't my resolve. It was the last of my fear of him. That night, I snuck down to the kitchen at 2 a.m. and started over. If Rick wanted to play games, I'd learn to play them better. The Iron Chef Challenge deadline was 12 days away, and I was going to make it no matter what he did to stop me. The midnight kitchen sessions became my secret rebellion. While Rick slept upstairs, I'd creep down in my socks and film by the light of my phone's flashlight, practicing knife cuts on vegetables I'd hidden in my backpack. The tiny beam created dramatic shadows that actually looked decent on camera, and the forced whisper quiet movements made me more precise than I'd ever been. But sneaking around was taking its toll. Dark circles ringed my eyes from staying up until 3 a.m., and I'd started making careless mistakes during the day. Yesterday, I'd left a shopping bag with ingredients visible in my car. Rick hadn't noticed yet, but it was only a matter of time before my luck ran out. The real breakthrough came when I remembered Miss Chen, my junior-year chemistry teacher who'd always encouraged my interest in the science of cooking. She had a full kitchen setup in her classroom for the culinary chemistry elective I'd begged my counselor to let me take. "Emma." Miss Chen looked surprised when I knocked on her door during lunch. "What can I do for you?" "I need a favor," I said, then launched into a carefully edited version of the truth. I was entering a cooking competition but didn't have access to proper equipment for the application video. Could I possibly use the classroom kitchen after school? What I didn't expect was how much Ms. Chen already knew. "Your stepfather doesn't support your cooking, does he?" she asked gently. "You've mentioned having to practice, when possible, in class discussions." My face burned with embarrassment. Had I been that obvious? "He thinks I'm wasting my time." "Well, I think you're one of the most naturally gifted students I've ever taught when it comes to understanding flavor chemistry and technique." Ms. Chen pulled out her keys. "You can use the kitchen any day after school until 6. I'll be grading papers anyway." For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. The classroom kitchen was a dream compared to sneaking around at home. Professional lighting, multiple camera angles, and actual space to work. Over the next week, I perfected my 3 signature dishes, the beef Wellington that had become my obsession, a pan-seared halibut with cauliflower puree and micro-herbs, and a chocolate soufflé with raspberry coulis that I'd been secretly developing for months. Each dish represented something different. The Wellington was technical precision, layers of flavors and textures that required perfect timing. The halibut showcased my understanding of delicate proteins and balance. The soufflé was pure artistry, the kind of dessert that separated real cooks from people just following recipes. But as I uploaded the final video on Thursday night, 5 days before the deadline, Rick's suspicions were growing dangerous. "You've been staying late at school a lot recently," he commented over dinner, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "What's so interesting in chemistry class?" "Just catching up on assignments," I mumbled. "Funny thing, I ran into Principal Martinez at the grocery store. Mentioned how dedicated you were to your studies. He seemed confused when I brought up all your after-school chemistry work." Rick cut his steak with deliberate precision. "Said Ms. Chen teaches a cooking class, not chemistry." My stomach dropped. Mom looked up from her salad, suddenly interested. "Cooking class. Emma, why didn't you tell us you were taking cooking?" It's culinary chemistry, I said quickly. We study the science behind. Behind what? Rick's voice was silk smooth and deadly. Behind lying to your parents about where you spend your time. Behind using school equipment to pursue your little fantasy. The room felt like it was shrinking. Mom's expression had shifted from curious to concerned, and I could see Rick calculating exactly how to spin this to make me look like a deceptive, ungrateful child. I want to see exactly what you've been cooking, he continued. Tomorrow after school, you're going to show me everything. My blood turned to ice water. Rick's demand hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall, and I could see the trap closing around me. If he saw what I'd been creating in Ms. Chen's classroom, the professional level plating, the complex techniques, the obvious hours of dedicated practice, he'd know this was far more than just a school assignment. That's not necessary, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's just basic stuff for class. Oh, I insist. Rick's smile was razor-sharp. If my stepdaughter is so passionate about culinary chemistry, I should support her education. Maybe I'll even have a chat with Ms. Chen about your progress. The threat was clear. He'd find a way to get me banned from the kitchen, probably by convincing the administration that I was misusing school resources or distracting from my real academics. I'd seen him charm his way through situations before. Rick was a master at presenting himself as the concerned parent while making others look unreasonable. Honey, that sounds like a great idea, Mom chimed in, completely missing the undercurrent of menace. I'd love to see what you've been learning too. Maybe you could cook dinner for us this weekend. My chest tightened. In 48 hours, I planned to submit my Iron Chef Challenge application. The portfolio was perfect, 3 stunning dishes, a flawless knife skills demonstration, and an essay that poured my heart onto the page. But if Rick discovered the truth tomorrow, everything would be over before it started. Actually, I said, an idea forming desperately in my mind, we're working on a big project presentation next week. I can't really show anything until it's complete. Ms. Chen is really strict about not sharing work in progress. Rick's eyes narrowed. How convenient. It's true, I pressed on, the lie building itself as I spoke. She has us sign agreements about not discussing our individual projects until the final presentations. Academic integrity policy. It sounded plausible enough that Mom nodded approvingly, but Rick wasn't buying it. I could see him filing away every word, preparing to verify every detail. Well then, I'll just have to wait for this mysterious presentation, he said. When is it exactly? Next Friday. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Now I backed myself into a corner with a specific date, 8 days after the Iron Chef Challenge deadline. Perfect. I'll clear my calendar. Rick's tone was conversational, but his meaning was crystal clear. He'd be watching, waiting, and ready to expose whatever he thought I was hiding. After dinner, I escaped to my room and stared at my laptop screen. The Iron Chef Challenge application sat in my drafts folder, complete and ready to submit. But submitting it now felt impossibly risky. If Rick somehow found out, if he saw the confirmation email, or if I won and it became public before I was ready, his retaliation would be swift and devastating. My phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Chen. Great work in the kitchen today. Your souffle technique is getting restaurant quality. Are you planning to pursue culinary school? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Here was a teacher who believed in my abilities, who saw potential that Rick was determined to crush. But believing in me and protecting me from Rick's wrath were two very different things. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, still figuring things out. Thanks for letting me use the kitchen. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized I had a choice to make. I could play it safe, withdraw from the competition, stick to Rick's rules, and slowly let my dreams suffocate under his constant criticism. Or I could take the biggest risk of my life and submit that application, knowing that discovery might mean losing my kitchen access entirely. The deadline was in 5 days. Rick was already suspicious. And I was running out of time to decide who I wanted to be. The next morning brought the worst possible news. Rick had taken a personal day from work. Thought I'd spend some quality time at home, he announced over breakfast, his tone deceptively casual. Maybe catch up on some things I've been meaning to investigate. The word investigate sent ice through my veins. I pushed eggs around my plate, trying to look normal while my mind raced. My Iron Chef application was still open in drafts on my laptop upstairs. The confirmation emails from the competition were in my inbox. If Rick decided to go through my room while I was at school. That's nice, honey, Mom said, already gathering her things for work. Emma, don't forget you have that chemistry thing after school. Actually, Rick interjected smoothly, I was thinking of picking Emma up today. Maybe we could grab dinner, just the two of us. Stepfather-stepdaughter bonding time. My stomach plummeted. If Rick picked me up, he'd see me leaving Ms. Chen's classroom kitchen. Game over. I can't today, I said quickly. We have a group study session. For the presentation. I'll probably be there until 6. No problem. I'll wait. Rick's smile was predatory. I've got nowhere else to be. After Mom left, Rick settled into his home office, which conveniently had a perfect view of my bedroom window. Any hope of sneaking back to delete my browser history evaporated. He was positioning himself to watch my every move. At school, I could barely concentrate on my classes. During lunch, I found Ms. Chen in her classroom. I need to ask another favor, I said, then explained about Rick's sudden interest in my after-school activities. Is there any way I could use the kitchen earlier? Maybe during your prep period? Ms. Chen studied my face carefully. Emma, is everything okay at home? You seem stressed. For a moment, I almost told her everything. About Rick's constant criticism, about the Iron Chef competition, about feeling like I was living with someone who actively wanted me to fail. But involving Ms. Chen more than I already had felt dangerous. Just family stuff, I said. Nothing serious. She didn't look convinced, but she handed me her keys anyway. 3rd period. But Emma, if you need someone to talk to about anything, I'm here. During 3rd period, I snuck into the empty kitchen and quickly filmed one final dish, a simple but elegant seared scallop appetizer that I could prepare in 20 minutes. It wasn't just about the application anymore, it was about having something to show Rick that would satisfy his suspicions without revealing the full scope of what I'd been doing. But as I was plating the scallops, disaster struck. The classroom door opened, and Principal Martinez walked in with two men in suits, clearly some kind of administrative officials or school board members. Expanding our vocational programs, Principal Martinez was saying. Our culinary chemistry elective has been particularly successful. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me standing behind the prep counter with a pan of perfectly seared scallops and my phone propped up to record. Miss Emma. What are you doing here during class time? My mouth went completely dry. The scallops were still sizzling in the pan. My phone was obviously recording. There was no innocent explanation for this scene. Ms. Chen said I could. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking. Ms. Chen is teaching sophomore biology right now, one of the suits observed. Are you supposed to have unsupervised access to this equipment? Principal Martinez looked genuinely confused and slightly concerned. Emma, you need to turn off that burner and come with me. We need to discuss this. As I followed him to his office, leaving my scallops abandoned on the counter, I realized Rick had one without even trying. By tomorrow, this would be a disciplinary issue. Ms. Chen might lose the privilege of letting students use the kitchen independently. And Rick would hear every detail when the school called home about my unauthorized use of school facilities. The Iron Chef application deadline was in 4 days. And I just lost my only safe space to cook. Principal Martinez's office felt like a courtroom as I sat across from his desk, waiting for the verdict. The two suits had left, but their disapproving expressions lingered in the air like smoke. My phone sat on his desk between us, the evidence of my unauthorized kitchen session recorded in high definition. Emma, I'm trying to understand what's happening here, Principal Martinez said, leaning back in his chair. Ms. Chen says she gave you permission to use the kitchen, but she didn't mention anything about filming during class hours. My throat felt like sandpaper. It was for a project. What kind of project requires professional-level food photography during your math class? He pulled up my schedule on his computer. Because according to this, you should have been in Mr. Peterson's calculus room 20 minutes ago. The walls seemed to be closing in. Every word I said was digging the hole deeper, but staying silent wasn't an option either. It's complicated, I managed. Then uncomplicate it for me. Principal Martinez's tone was patient but firm. Because right now, it looks like you've been skipping classes to play around in the kitchen, and that's a conversation I'm going to have with your parents. The word parents hit me like a physical blow. Rick would be so pleased to get this call. Not only would it confirm his suspicions about my after-school activities, but now he could paint me as a delinquent who skips class and lies to administrators. He'd have weeks of ammunition. Please don't call home, I said, hating how desperate I sounded. I can explain everything, I need more time. Time for what, Emma? Principal Martinez leaned forward, his expression shifting from stern to concerned. Talk to me. What's really going on? For the second time that day, I almost told the truth. Almost explained about the competition, about Rick's sabotage, about feeling like cooking was the only thing I was good at and watching it get taken away piece by piece. But involving another adult felt like lighting a fuse on a bomb I couldn't control. I've been entering a cooking competition, I said finally, settling for a partial truth. The application is due soon, and I needed good photos. I thought I could do it quickly during my free period. A cooking competition. His eyebrows rose. What kind of competition? Local Iron Chef Challenge. For amateur cooks. The words came easier now. I've been working on my application for weeks, but I don't have the right equipment at home to take proper photos. Principal Martinez was quiet for a long moment, drumming his fingers on the desk. Why the secrecy, Emma? If this is legitimate, why not ask for official permission? Because my stepfather would destroy me, I thought. Because he's probably sitting at home right now, planning exactly how to humiliate me when he finds out about this. Because every dream I've ever shared has been turned into a weapon against me. My family doesn't really support the cooking thing, I said instead. They think it's a waste of time. Something in my voice must have convinced him, because Principal Martinez's expression softened slightly. Emma, I can't ignore the fact that you skipped class and used school equipment without proper authorization. That has to have consequences. He paused, considering. But I also don't want to discourage a student who's passionate about something productive. What's the deadline for this competition? Monday. 4 days. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. I'm going to call Ms. Chen and your parents to discuss this situation. But first, I want to see exactly what you've been working on. My heart hammered against my ribs as he dialed. In 10 minutes, Rick would know everything. And my last chance at proving myself would be over before it began. The phone rang 3 times before Ms. Chen picked up. Principal Martinez. Is everything okay? I watched his face as he explained the situation, my stomach twisting tighter with each word. Ms. Chen's responses were muffled, but I caught fragments, very talented student, and didn't realize she was skipping class, and finally, the words that made my blood freeze, yes, I'll be right down. Ms. Chen is coming to discuss this, Principal Martinez said, hanging up. And I'm going to need to call your parents after we. A knock interrupted him. Ms. Chen entered, looking flustered and concerned, carrying my abandoned plate of scallops. Emma, what were you thinking? She set the plate on Principal Martinez's desk. The scallops were perfectly golden, still elegantly plated despite the chaos. I gave you permission to use the kitchen during lunch, not to skip classes. I'm sorry, I whispered. I just needed one more dish for the portfolio, and lunch wasn't enough time, and... Portfolio? Principal Martinez picked up one of the scallops with a fork, examining it. This is restaurant-quality work, Emma. Ms. Chen sighed. She's been working on a competition application. I've been letting her use the kitchen after school because... She glanced at me, seeming to choose her words carefully. Because she doesn't have adequate resources at home. What kind of competition? Principal Martinez took a bite of the scallop, his eyebrows rising in surprise. Metro Area Iron Chef Challenge, Ms. Chen said. It's a legitimate culinary competition for amateur cooks. Very competitive. Emma has real talent. This is some of the best student work I've seen in 15 years of teaching. Something shifted in the principal's expression as he finished the scallop. This is exceptional. Where did you learn to cook like this? Self-taught, mostly, I mumbled. YouTube videos, cookbook experiments, lots of practice. Show me the rest of your portfolio, he said suddenly. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos, the beef Wellington with its perfect pastry layers, the halibut with its delicate herb garnish, the chocolate soufflé with its flawless rise. His expression grew more impressed with each image. Emma, this is professional level work. Why aren't your parents supporting this? This could be a genuine career path. Ms. Chen and I exchanged glances. How could I explain that Rick's version of support involved throwing my food in the garbage and calling me delusional? They think I should focus on more traditional academics, I said carefully. Principal Martinez studied my face for a moment, then made a decision that surprised me. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to serve detention for skipping class, that's non-negotiable. But you're going to serve it in the kitchen, working with Ms. Chen to perfect your competition entry. If this is as good as it appears, the school should be supporting you, not punishing you. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by panic. But you still have to call my parents. I have to call them about the class-skipping incident, yes. But I'm going to frame this as a discussion about your exceptional culinary abilities and potential scholarship opportunities. He smiled slightly. Sometimes how you present information makes all the difference. My heart was still racing as he dialed our home number. Through the phone speaker, I heard Rick's voice answer, artificially cheerful. Rick Morrison speaking. Mr. Morrison, this is Principal Martinez at the high school. I'm calling about Emma, but don't worry, she's not in trouble. Well, not serious trouble. I actually wanted to discuss some remarkable talent she's been demonstrating. I listened to Principal Martinez paint my unauthorized kitchen session as evidence of exceptional dedication and natural ability. He mentioned the competition, the quality of my work, even suggested that the school might want to showcase my achievements. Rick's responses were perfectly calibrated, interested, supportive, proud. Everything a good stepfather should say. But I could hear the undertone of fury beneath his pleasant words, and I knew that when I got home, there would be hell to pay. The ride home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Rick had volunteered to pick me up after my detention in the kitchen, his voice sickeningly sweet when he called Miss Chen to arrange it. I sat in the passenger seat, watching his knuckles go white as he gripped the steering wheel, the silence between us crackling with barely contained rage. So, he said finally, his tone conversational in that dangerous way that meant I was about to get destroyed. Iron Chef Challenge. Scholarship opportunities. Restaurant quality work. Each phrase dripped with venom. Quite the little secret you've been keeping. I stared out the window, not trusting myself to speak. Every house we passed felt like a countdown to my execution. 3 years, Emma. 3 years I've been trying to teach you about reality, about your actual skill level, about the difference between fantasy and truth. And this whole time, you've been sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, making me look like a fool. I wasn't trying to make you look like anything, I said quietly. Rick's laugh was harsh and bitter. Oh, but you did. Do you have any idea how that conversation sounded to me? Your principal going on and on about your exceptional talent and professional level work while I stood there like an idiot, pretending I knew what he was talking about. We pulled into our driveway, but Rick didn't turn off the engine. Instead, he turned to face me fully, his eyes cold and calculating. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw from this competition immediately. You're going to apologize to Ms. Chen for manipulating her into helping you deceive your family. And you're going to explain to your mother exactly how you've been lying to us about your after-school activities. My stomach dropped. Rick, please. Please what? Please let you continue making a fool of me. Please enable your delusions a little longer. His voice was rising now, the careful control slipping. I've seen your cooking, Emma. I've tasted it. It's amateur garbage, just like I've always told you. Whatever show you put on for your teacher and that principal, it doesn't change reality. But Principal Martinez said. Principal Martinez is being polite. He's doing his job, encouraging a student, saying what he thinks you want to hear. That's what adults do for children who are trying hard at something they're not good at. Rick's words hit like physical blows. Did you really think a few fancy photos and some borrowed equipment would suddenly make you a real chef? I could feel tears threatening, but I forced them back. Crying would only make this worse. The competition deadline is Monday, I said desperately. Just let me try. If I lose, if I embarrass myself, then you'll have proof that you were right all along. I already have proof. I've had proof for 3 years. Rick finally turned off the engine, the sudden silence deafening. But you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe you need to fail spectacularly in front of real judges to finally understand what I've been trying to tell you. Hope flickered in my chest, dangerous and fragile. So you'll let me enter? Rick's smile was predatory. Oh, I'll do better than that. I'm going to help you enter. We're going to make sure your application is perfect, your photos are flawless, your essay is heartfelt and inspiring. His tone grew softer, more menacing. And when you lose, when the real culinary experts confirm everything I've been saying about your abilities, you're going to thank me for trying to save you from this humiliation. He opened his car door, then paused. One condition, though. When you crash and burn at this competition, you give up cooking entirely. No more sneaking around, no more practice, no more wasting everyone's time with this fantasy. Deal? My mouth went dry. He was offering me everything I wanted, but the price was everything I was. If I failed, I'd lose cooking forever. If I succeeded, I'd have to live with Rick's fury for the rest of high school. Deal, I whispered. Rick's smile widened. Excellent. Let's go tell your mother about your big opportunity. The conversation with Mom went exactly as Rick had planned, a masterclass in manipulation disguised as supportive parenting. Emma, why didn't you tell me about this competition? Mom asked, her voice a mixture of hurt and excitement as we sat around the kitchen table. This sounds like such an amazing opportunity. Rick had his arm draped casually around her shoulders, playing the role of proud stepfather perfectly. I think Emma was nervous about getting our hopes up, he said, his tone warm and understanding. Weren't you, sweetheart? The endearment made my skin crawl, especially knowing what he'd said in the car. But Mom beamed at his apparent support. Well, I think it's wonderful that you're pursuing your passion, she continued. Rick, didn't you say you wanted to help her prepare? Absolutely. In fact, I insist on it. Rick's smile was brilliant and terrifying. Emma's been working so hard on her own, it's time she had access to proper equipment, professional ingredients, the full kitchen experience. Mom clapped her hands together. Oh, this is perfect. Rick, you could mentor her. Share some of your culinary expertise. My blood turned to ice water. The last thing I needed was Rick's help with my competition dishes. But refusing now would seem ungrateful and suspicious. That's really not necessary, I started. Nonsense, Rick interrupted smoothly. What kind of stepfather would I be if I didn't support Emma's dreams? Besides, I'm curious to see what she's capable of when she has access to the right tools. There it was, the trap, laid out perfectly. Rick would sabotage me with kindness, helping me just enough to take credit when I failed. Every mistake would become proof of his superior knowledge. Every success would be attributed to his guidance. We should start tomorrow, he continued. The competition is Monday, so we'll have the whole weekend to perfect your dishes. I'll even close off the kitchen, make it Emma's domain. Mom looked ready to cry with happiness. Rick, that's so generous. Emma, aren't you excited? I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Very excited. Good. It's settled then. Rick's eyes met mine across the table, and I saw the challenge there. We'll see exactly what you're made of, Emma. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through increasingly desperate scenarios. Rick had me trapped completely. If I tried to prepare my dishes alone, he'd intervene as the helpful stepfather. If I accepted his help, he'd find subtle ways to undermine everything, too much salt in the risotto, overcooking the protein, ruining the delicate balance I'd spent months perfecting. But there was something else bothering me, a detail that had been nagging at the edge of my consciousness since dinner. When Mom mentioned Rick's culinary expertise, he'd gotten that look, the same expression he wore when someone complimented his cooking at family gatherings. Pride mixed with something else. Something that looked almost like insecurity. I thought back to every meal Rick had made in the 3 years he'd lived here. They were good, sure, but they were also safe. Basic techniques, classic combinations, nothing that required real creativity or risk. For someone who criticized my amateur skills so harshly, his own repertoire seemed surprisingly limited. A crazy idea began forming in my mind. What if Rick's expertise wasn't as solid as he pretended? What if his constant criticism of my cooking came from his own insecurities about his abilities? It was a dangerous theory to test, but as I drifted toward sleep, a plan began taking shape. Rick wanted to help me prepare for the competition. Fine. But this weekend, I was going to push both of us to our limits. And we'd see who really knew their way around a kitchen. Saturday morning arrived with Rick already in the kitchen, expensive ingredients arranged across the counter like battle formations. He'd clearly been up early, transforming the space into his vision of a professional workspace, knife rolls displayed prominently, his Le Creuset collection gleaming, even a digital scale positioned at the perfect angle. Ready for your masterclass? He asked, gesturing grandly at the setup. I thought we'd start by deconstructing your Wellington technique. Show you how it's really done. I bit back my first response and nodded instead. That sounds great. But actually, I was hoping you could teach me something more advanced first. Something I've never attempted before. Rick's chest puffed with pride. Of course. What did you have in mind? Beef bourguignon. The traditional French method, not the simplified version. I'd chosen this deliberately, a dish that required real technique, precise timing, and the kind of classical training Rick claimed to have. I saw this incredible recipe from Auguste Escoffier, but it looked too complicated for me to try alone. Escoffier. Rick's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. Well, that's ambitious. Maybe we should start with something more basic. But you could handle it, right? I mean, with your experience. I pressed gently. I'd love to learn from watching you work. The trap was set. If Rick admitted the dish was beyond his abilities, he'd undermine his own authority. If he agreed to make it, I'd get to see exactly how deep his knowledge really went. Of course I can handle it, he said after a pause. Bourguignon is a classic. Every serious cook should know it. I handed him my phone, displaying the traditional recipe I'd found, the real deal, with steps like larding the beef with strips of salt pork and flaming with cognac and timing that required starting the dish 6 hours before serving. Rick's eyes moved across the screen, and I watched his confidence drain away. This version seems a bit elaborate, he said finally. The modern approach is much more efficient. Oh, but I wanted to learn the authentic method. The way real French chefs do it. I kept my voice innocent, admiring. You always say technique matters more than shortcuts. Rick was trapped by his own lectures, and we both knew it. He scrolled through the recipe again, probably hoping it would somehow become simpler on a second reading. Fine, he said tersely. But we're doing this properly. No questions, no interruptions. Watch and learn. The first sign of trouble came when Rick couldn't find his larding needle. He spent 10 minutes searching through drawers, muttering about organization, before finally admitting he might need to improvise that step. Then came the revelation that he'd never actually flambéed anything before. The alcohol burns off anyway, he said, pouring cognac into the pan without lighting it. This is more practical. But doesn't the flaming create a specific flavor profile? I asked innocently. Something about caramelization. Rick's jaw tightened. It's an unnecessary show-off technique. Real cooking is about substance, not theatrics. As the morning progressed, I watched Rick's composure crumble. He overcooked the pearl onions, forgot to season the mushrooms, and created a sauce that looked more like brown water than the rich, glossy reduction the recipe promised. Each mistake was accompanied by increasingly creative excuses about adapting the recipe for modern tastes or correcting Escoffier's outdated methods. But the real revelation came when he tasted the final result. I watched his face carefully as he took a spoonful of the thin, flavorless stew he'd created. For just a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Rick knew it was terrible. Well, he said, forcing brightness into his voice, that's the traditional method. As you can see, there's a reason modern techniques have evolved beyond this. I nodded thoughtfully. It is pretty different from the bourguignon at Le Bernardin. When did you eat there last? The question hit him like a physical blow. Le Bernardin was a 3-Michelin-star restaurant in New York, the kind of place that would be a pilgrimage for any serious food lover. Rick's eyes darted away from mine. It's been a while, he mumbled. What was your favorite dish there? The fish was excellent. Very fresh. Le Bernardin was famous for seafood, but Rick's answer was so vague it could have come from a Google search. A real diner would remember specific preparations, sauces, the experience of tasting truly exceptional food. Should we start on my Wellington now? I asked, as if I hadn't just shattered the foundation of his culinary authority. Rick looked at the disaster of bourguignon, then at me, and I saw something new in his expression, fear. He was beginning to suspect that I might actually know what I was doing. The Wellington preparation began with Rick hovering over my shoulder like a vulture, determined to reassert his authority after the bourguignon disaster. But something had shifted between us. His criticism felt more desperate now, less confident. Your knife work is sloppy, he said as I began dicing the mushrooms for the duxelle. Look at those uneven pieces. In a real kitchen, that would be unacceptable. I paused, studying the mushrooms I'd cut. They were uniform quarter-inch dice, textbook perfect. Rick was grasping for flaws that didn't exist. You're right, I said carefully. Could you show me the proper technique? Rick took the knife, his grip awkward and uncertain. His cuts were larger than mine, irregular, and he nearly sliced his finger twice. The mushrooms looked like they'd been hacked apart rather than properly diced. See? Clean, efficient cuts, he said, stepping back to admire his work. I stared at the mangled vegetables, understanding flooding through me. Rick couldn't see the difference. After 3 years of his criticism, I'd assumed his palate and technique were superior to mine. But watching him struggle with basic knife skills, fail at classical preparations, and present obvious mistakes as improvements, the truth became crystal clear. Rick wasn't a better cook than me. He might never have been. The mushrooms need to cook down completely, I said, taking over the pan. If there's any moisture left, it'll make the pastry soggy. I know that, Rick snapped, but he stepped aside and let me work. As I stirred the duxelle, coaxing out every drop of liquid until the mixture became a dark, intensely flavored paste, I felt Rick watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The mushrooms smelled incredible, earthy and rich, seasoned perfectly with thyme and shallots. How did you know to add white wine? He asked suddenly. It deglazes the pan and adds acidity to balance the richness, I replied automatically, then caught myself. I read that somewhere. Online. But the damage was done. Rick had heard the confidence in my voice, the understanding that came from experience rather than theory. When I moved to sear the beef tenderloin, he watched my technique with growing alarm. Temperature's too high, he said desperately. You're going to burn it. The pan was at exactly the right heat for a proper sear, hot enough to create a golden crust without overcooking the interior. I turned the beef with precise timing, each side developing the perfect caramelization that would add flavor and create the barrier needed for the pastry. It looks good to me, I said, resting the beef to cool while I rolled out the puff pastry. The pastry's too thin, Rick tried again. It wasn't. I'd measured everything precisely, rolling it to exactly the thickness that would cook through without becoming soggy or tough. But Rick's criticism was becoming more frantic now, like he sensed his authority slipping away with each perfect technique I demonstrated. Then Mom walked into the kitchen. Oh my goodness, it smells incredible in here, she exclaimed, taking in the scene, the perfectly prepared components, my focused work at the counter, Rick standing uselessly to the side. Emma, this looks so professional. Rick, you must be such a good teacher. Rick's face flushed dark red. Actually, Emma's been doing most of the work herself. I'm just supervising. Well, she's learned from the best, Mom said warmly, completely missing the tension crackling between us. As I carefully wrapped the beef in pastry, creating the classic Wellington shape with neat, precise folds, I could feel Rick's desperation building. This dish was going to be perfect, and we both knew it. When it came out of the oven 40 minutes later, the pastry was golden and flaky, the beef a perfect medium rare, the duxelle providing an earthy contrast that made the whole dish sing. Rick stared at my Wellington with undisguised horror. Because now he knew the truth, I was better than him, and I always had been. The silence in the kitchen was deafening as we all stared at my perfect Wellington. Mom took another bite, her eyes closing in bliss, completely oblivious to the seismic shift happening between Rick and me. Emma, this is restaurant quality, she said, shaking her head in amazement. I had no idea you were this talented. Rick, you should enter competitions yourself if this is what you can teach her. Rick's face went through several shades of red before settling on a sickly pale. Like I said, Emma did most of the work herself. But I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, the desperate calculation of someone whose entire identity was crumbling. For 3 years, he'd built his authority in this house on being the culinary expert, the one who knew better, the adult who could judge my amateur efforts. Now that foundation was gone. We should take pictures. Mom exclaimed, pulling out her phone. Emma, stand next to your Wellington. This is going in our family album. As Mom snapped photos, Rick caught my eye. The look he gave me was pure venom, not just anger, but something deeper. Humiliation. The kind that breeds revenge. Actually, Rick said suddenly, his voice taking on that dangerous calm I knew too well, I think we should discuss Emma's competition strategy. There are some concerns I have about her approach. Mom looked up from her phone. Concerns? Well, this Wellington is lovely for a home kitchen, but competition cooking is entirely different. Professional judges, time pressure, equipment you're not familiar with. Rick's confidence was returning as he found his angle. I'd hate to see Emma get overwhelmed and embarrass herself. My stomach clenched. He was pivoting, looking for a new way to undermine me. What kind of concerns? I asked carefully. For starters, your menu is too ambitious. Beef Wellington, pan-seared halibut, chocolate soufflé, that's 3 completely different cooking techniques under extreme pressure. Any professional chef would tell you to simplify. His tone was reasonable, almost caring. I think you should reconsider your dish selection. But those are the dishes I've been perfecting for months, I protested. At home, with unlimited time and no pressure. Competition cooking is about reliability under stress, not showing off. Rick turned to Mom, making his appeal to the reasonable parent. Sarah, you've seen cooking competitions on TV. The contestants who try to do too much always crash and burn. Mom nodded slowly, her excitement dimming. That does sound stressful, honey. Maybe Rick's right about keeping it simple. Panic rose in my throat. Rick was systematically dismantling my confidence, and worse, he was making it sound like concern for my well-being. I can handle the pressure, I said, but my voice came out smaller than I intended. Can you? Rick's eyebrows rose in false sympathy. Emma, you get nervous ordering pizza over the phone. And now you want to cook for professional judges in front of cameras with a ticking clock. The observation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. I was anxious in social situations, uncomfortable being the center of attention. But cooking was different. In the kitchen, I felt confident, capable, in control. Maybe I could do just 1 dish instead of 3. I heard myself saying, hating how uncertain I sounded. That's more realistic, Rick agreed quickly. Something simple but well executed. Maybe a nice pasta dish. Something comforting and approachable. I wanted to scream. He was trying to reduce me to making spaghetti and meatballs when I was capable of restaurant-level technique. But with Mom nodding along, agreeing that simple might be better, I felt my carefully planned competition strategy slipping away. The deadline is tomorrow, I said weakly. Then you'd better decide quickly, Rick replied, his smile sharp as a blade. Unless you're having second thoughts about the whole thing. The words hit me like a slap. Rick was offering me an out, a way to withdraw from the competition while saving face. All I had to do was admit I was scared, agree that I'd bitten off more than I could chew, and retreat back into the safe space of his diminished expectations. I'm not having second thoughts, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Rick's smile faltered slightly. Emma, be practical. This isn't about your talent, it's about experience. Competition cooking is brutal. Even professional chefs struggle with the pressure. How would you know? The question slipped out before I could stop it. The kitchen went dead silent. Mom looked between us, confused by the sudden tension. Rick's face darkened. Excuse me. My heart was hammering, but something had broken loose inside me. When was the last time you actually competed in anything? Or worked in a professional kitchen? Or even ate at a restaurant that wasn't a chain? Emma. Mom's voice was sharp with shock. That's incredibly rude. But I couldn't stop now. 3 years of swallowed criticism, destroyed dishes, and constant undermining came pouring out. He threw away my Wellington last week. Called it amateur garbage before he even tasted it. He's been telling me I have no talent for years, but today I watched him butcher a simple bourguignon recipe and pretend it was an improvement. Rick's face was cycling through colors again. Sarah, your daughter is having some kind of breakdown. I'm having a breakthrough, I interrupted. I'm finally understanding that you've been lying. To me, to Mom, maybe even to yourself. You're not a culinary expert. You're just someone who owns expensive equipment and watches cooking shows. Mom stepped between us, her face pale. Emma, stop this right now. Rick has been nothing but supportive. Supportive? I laughed bitterly. He literally told me yesterday that I should find a career in retail because I'm good at disappointment. Does that sound supportive to you? The color drained from Mom's face. She turned to Rick, searching his expression. You said that? It was taken out of context, Rick said quickly. Emma was being unrealistic about her prospects, and I was trying to help her set reasonable expectations. By calling me delusional and telling me I'd never amount to anything. My voice was rising now, months of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. By forbidding me from using kitchen equipment that could help me improve. By making sure I felt worthless every time I tried to cook something. That's not. I never. Rick was scrambling now, his usual smooth manipulation failing under the weight of specific accusations. Mom's expression was changing, pieces clicking into place. Rick, is this true? Have you been discouraging Emma's cooking? I've been trying to protect her from disappointment, he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Sarah, you know how sensitive she is. I didn't want her building impossible dreams. By destroying her food? I pressed. By mocking her in front of the whole family? By telling her she has no talent when she clearly does? The Wellington sat between us on the counter, golden and perfect, undeniable proof of my abilities. Rick glanced at it, then away, unable to argue with the evidence. Emma, Mom said quietly, how long has this been going on? 3 years. Since the day he moved in. I felt tears threatening but pushed them back. Every dish I've made, every technique I've learned, every small success I've had, he's found a way to tear it down. And I started believing him. Rick opened his mouth, probably to launch into damage control mode, but Mom held up her hand. I think, she said slowly, her voice carrying a chill I'd never heard before, we need to have a very different conversation about this competition. Rick's face went ashen as he realized his carefully constructed authority was crumbling around him. The Iron Chef Challenge kitchen was nothing like I'd imagined. Bright television lights blazed overhead, cameras tracked every movement, and the countdown clock glowed red like a heartbeat. 60 minutes to create my signature dish. 60 minutes to prove everything. Contestants, your mystery ingredient is duck breast. The host's voice boomed through the studio. Your time starts, now. My hands moved without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over as I reached for the duck. Around me, 5 other amateur cooks scrambled for ingredients, their panic palpable. But I felt strangely calm, like I'd been training for this moment my entire life. The duck breast was beautiful, thick, well-marbled, skin perfect for scoring. I could see my dish forming, duck breast with cherry gastrique, fondant potatoes, and wilted baby spinach. Classic technique, bold flavors, restaurant presentation. Looking confident there, Emma. One of the judges stopped at my station as I scored the skin in perfect crosshatches. Tell us about your dish. Pan-seared duck breast with cherry gastrique, fondant potatoes, and garlic wilted spinach, I said, my voice steady despite the cameras. The gastrique will provide acidity to cut through the richness of the duck, and the fondant potatoes will add an elegant textural contrast. The judge's eyebrows rose. Ambitious for 17. Where did you learn to cook like this? Self-taught, mostly. A lot of practice and a few people who believed in me. I thought of Ms. Chen, of Principal Martinez, even of Mom's shocked face when she'd finally seen the truth about Rick's support. 30 minutes remaining. The kitchen around me dissolved into pure focus. Duck skin searing to golden perfection, the satisfying hiss as it hit the hot pan. Cherry gastrique reducing on the back burner, transforming from fruit and vinegar into liquid silk. Potatoes turning slowly in butter and thyme, their edges becoming creamy while their center stayed firm. This was what Rick had never understood. Cooking wasn't about showing off or proving superiority. It was about transformation, taking raw ingredients and turning them into something that could make people feel joy, comfort, love. It was alchemy, and I was finally free to practice it without shame. 10 minutes. Plating time. My hands were completely steady now, moving with the precision I developed through hundreds of hours of secret practice. Duck sliced to reveal the perfect pink interior. Gastrique pooled artfully around the protein. Fondant potatoes stacked with architectural elegance. Spinach wilted just enough to intensify its color while maintaining texture. Time. Step back from your dishes. I looked down at my plate and felt a surge of pure pride. It was beautiful, restaurant quality, maybe better. Every element perfectly executed, every flavor balanced, every component working in harmony. The judging felt like an out-of-body experience. I watched the 3 professional chefs taste my dish, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine surprise to something that looked like respect. Emma, this is exceptional work, the head judge said finally. Your technique is flawless, your flavors are perfectly balanced, and your presentation is restaurant caliber. This is some of the finest amateur cooking we've seen in this competition. When they announced my name as the winner, the studio erupted in applause, but all I could think about was Rick sitting at home, watching his stepdaughter achieve exactly what he told her was impossible. I'd won more than a competition. I'd won myself back. 3 days later, the feature article in local foodie magazine arrived in our mailbox. Rick's face was stone as he read the headline, Teen Chef Triumphs, Self-Taught Cook Wins Iron Chef Challenge. Congratulations, he said quietly, his voice hollow. Thank you, I replied, and meant it. Because his words couldn't hurt me anymore.